Few places on earth make people think of death, horror, and pure pain more than the most famous concentration camp run by the Nazis. From what we've learned, it was a place where undesirables were sent to die. Things you learned in high school were better, but this was worse. Some places in history classes just won't go. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum says that between 1940 and 1945, about 1.3 million people were sent to Auschwitz. To give you an idea, that's about the same number of people living in all of Maine. 1.1 million of those people were killed there in those 5 years. On June 14, 1940, the first prisoners showed up. DW says those first 728 prisoners were Polish resistance fighters. That was the camp's original goal, to house the people the Nazis thought were the most dangerous to their rule. The SS put 30 German offenders in charge of keeping an evil eye on the students and scholars. Most of them were students and scholars. It wasn't long before Auschwitz became the last place where many, many more people died. Here's what you didn't know about the most famous Nazi camp. The man who volunteered to go to Auschwitz. Witold Pilecki, a Polish army officer, walked into a crowd of people in Warsaw on September 18, 1940. The Washington Post says he went to Auschwitz on his own because German troops were rounding them up to get them ready for the trip. The New York Times says he smuggled out several stories about what was really going on in the camp. During 1940, 1941, and 1942, documents were leaked, and he wrote even more after his escape in 1943. This is a story from someone who was there and saw the horrible things that happened. It starts with the public executions of some Polish prisoners at the camp. They were sometimes shot and sometimes left out in the cold. Later, he saw the focus shift to Jewish prisoners, writing, "Over 1,000 a day from the new transports were gassed. The corpses were burnt in the new crematoria. And all the while fighting typhus and suffering beatings, he organized a resistance network within the camp, in addition to sending messages. The first message, bomb Auschwitz. He got away in 1943, and he lived to see the end of the war and the camp's freedom. But his support for the idea of a free and independent Poland was seen as a problem. In 1947, he was caught, tortured, and labeled an enemy of the state. The next year, he was put to death. When you have nothing left to lose, why not? Also on the Nazis' list of people to kill, the Romans. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum says that about 23,000 Roma were sent to the camp, where 21,000 of them died. But they were also part of a revolt that was crazy brave. Most of them were kept in a part of Auschwitz called Zigeunerlager, which was like a holding area for whole families. While it was being built in 1942, it was decided in 1944 that everyone in the camp would be killed so that more prisoners could be put there. About 6,000 Roma lived there at the time. The next day, after being told that they were going to be killed, about 600 of them armed themselves with hammers and shovels, barricaded themselves in their barracks, and told the Nazis that if they wanted to take them to the gas chambers, they should come in and get them. What an amazing fact. The Council of Europe portal says they kind of won, at least for a little while. It was May 16th, 1944. As planned, no one died that day. Half of the Roma prisoners were moved to other camps instead. For the second half, the break turned out to be nothing more than a reprieve. Even though they were put in the gas chambers on August 2nd, that day is still remembered as Romani Resistance Day. Work will absolutely not set you free at Auschwitz. The Sonderkommando was made up of the best men who were sent to Auschwitz. The Jewish Virtual Library says that some people were told they would be safe and that working for the Nazis would protect their families. They quickly learned that it wasn't always the truth. The Sonderkommando only hired strong, healthy people because they had to be able to lift a dead body. Part of their job wasn't just to lie to prisoners as they led them to the gas chambers. They also had to remove the bodies afterward. Since their families often came with them on the same transport, for many, the first job was to get rid of family members. They would go through the clothes, take out any jewels or gold teeth, and carry the bodies to the crematoriums. When the bodies' ashes started to pile up, they were the ones who dumped them in a nearby river. They were told to help the Nazis and hide proof, but not all of them did what they were told. Someone from the Sonderkommando brought in a camera in 1944 and took shots of women waiting in line to die in the gas chambers and bodies being burned. Marcel Najeri wrote down what he saw and hid his notebook in the forest outside of Auschwitz. It was found there in 1980. History shows that only about 100 Sonderkommando made it through the Holocaust alive. Let's take some of them with us. The Jewish Virtual Library says that the Sonderkommando of Auschwitz was killed every few months and new prisoners were chosen to take their place. Once this had happened a few times, everyone knew what was going to happen, and the 12th Sonderkommando chose to bring some Nazis with them. The revolt took place on October 7, 1944, but Rosa Robota and the Weichblum sisters Esther and Hannah helped plant the ideas much earlier. They worked at the weapons plant where, along with Regina Saphirstein and Alla Gertner, they began sneaking gunpowder out of the country. It wasn't hard to get it to the Sonderkommando because moving bodies was part of their job. They would sometimes hide the gunpowder on bodies that were going to be thrown away. They had plans for the dynamite, but the revolt began in Crematorium 1 when some Polish prisoners took a particularly cruel guard by the throat and put him in an oven. Soon, people who work at the other 3 crematoriums join in, and what's with all that gunpowder? They took that to Incinerator 4, where the Sonderkommando set it off as a suicide mission. That incinerator would never be used again. The rebellion was put down, and 200 Sonderkommando were put to death right away. The 13th Sonderkommando then disposed of their bodies. The women were caught and abused, but they never gave up the names of other people who were still alive who were involved. On January 5, 1945, they were hung. The twin experiments of the Angel of Death. Dr. Joseph Mengele and his helpers would stand at the door to Auschwitz and wait and watch whenever new prisoners came in. What were some of the things they looked for? 2 of them. Records show that Mengele did experiments on 732 pairs of twins at Auschwitz, according to the BBC. Other figures put the number at around 1,500. Some people lived like the people in the picture, and many afterward told what was done to them, which is pretty horrible. According to history, one twin was often used as a control subject while the other was tested on. When the twin who was being studied died, the other twin was also killed, and their bodies were both autopsied so that scientists could learn more about genetics and birth order. The what kind of tests? Some remembered getting injections that were supposed to change the color of their eyes, while others said they were purposely infected with diseases and substances that were chosen for how badly they would make them respond. The reactions of twins to things like surgery without anesthesia and being sterilized against their will were measured and written down. This was all done with one goal in mind, to find new ways to help Hitler's Aryan master race grow. Block 10. A part of Auschwitz called Block 10 was in the main camp. You may have heard of Joseph Mengele as the only doctor who worked there, but he wasn't the only one doing medical trials there. Another person working in Block 10 was Karl Klauberg. He wanted to find an easy way to sterilize big groups of people. One of the things he tested was a non-surgical way for putting chemicals that hurt the female reproductive organs into them. The inflammation it caused led to swelling and sterilization, and the Jewish Virtual Library says it also killed a lot of people. The same project was being worked on by Dr. Horst Schumann, but he was using X-rays on patients to try to find the right amount of radiation to kill germs without burning them. This was called unsatisfactory because too many people died. There as well, prisoners were starved to see what happened as people lost weight, and Dr. Johann Paul Kremer questioned them as they lay dying. Doctors Entres, Vetter and Wirths took part in clinical studies that were paid for by IG Farben, which makes Bayer. These trials looked at how well new drugs worked at fighting disease, and most of the drugs were given to prisoners on purpose. Dr. August Hirt used the chance to gather a lot of Jewish skeletons so that he could measure them and be sure that Jews were physically different from Hitler's master race, and therefore less valuable. Block 11. If you think that going to Auschwitz is a punishment enough, there was a whole block called Block 11 that was only for more torture. Most of the punishments were only given to prisoners who were thought to have done things like sabotage or tried to escape, or who were found trying to escape. The Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum says that those prisoners were kept in dark rooms and were usually doomed to die of hunger. There were regular cells, standing cells, and dark cells, which was a good name for them. Those had less than a square meter of floor room and a single vent that was only 5 centimeters square. Some people were sent there for weeks at a time, but usually only at night because they had to work during the day. The Jewish Virtual Library says that it wasn't just for people who had been sent to Auschwitz. Anyone living outside the camp who was caught helping inmates could also end up there, along with war prisoners. This is also where Zyklon B was put on trial. In the basement, 850 Soviet and Polish prisoners were killed from September 3rd to 5th, 1941. What about outside? That's where the death wall was between blocks 10 and 11. People were flogged in the courtyard and put to death against the wall. The man who saved the children of Auschwitz. Holocaust.Caesar says that Friedrich Hirsch could have fled because after Hitler took power, his mother, brother and stepfather went to Bolivia. But he stayed, and by doing so, he saved many lives. At first, he worked with Jewish camp children. He made sure they had things to clean themselves, kept them in school, and made sure they got daily exercise. In 1943, he was caught helping Jewish children in Terezin talk to people outside of Terezin. He was sent to Auschwitz, but he continued to care for the youngest Nazi victims. Once he got to Auschwitz, he set up the blocks for children. That's where the kids would spend the day before going back to their parents' camps at night. There, he made sure they kept going to school in secret and set up opportunities that saved their lives. Hirsch made it so that roll call could be done inside instead of outside in the snow and rain. He also made sure that there was always extra food by sending packages to children that were meant for dead people. By the beginning of 1944, his day camp had hundreds of kids every day, until the secret resistance at Auschwitz came up to him and asked him to join. The rebels gave him an hour to make up their mind. After that hour, his body was found. No one knows what happened to him, but he did name 2 people to carry on the work. He started to protect the children of Auschwitz. The 144th, 144. Out of the 1.3 million people sent to Auschwitz, that many were able to escape and stay alive. The first was Tadeusz Wejewski, a Polish prisoner. He was taken to Auschwitz on June 14, 1940, with the first group of prisoners. His number was 220. When a group of civilian workers came to work at the camp, he took advantage of the chance. He put on work clothes and just left. The Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum says that the punishments were harsh. The rest of the prisoners were lined up outside and had to stand there for 20 hours, while SS guards walked back and forth and kicked and hit inmates as they pleased. One person, Dawid Łączewski, died at Auschwitz and was the first person to die there. The SS openly flogged people they thought had helped the escapees. As time went on, escapes became less common. Some stole SS outfits and cars and left them where other people could see them. In 1942, a group of Polish prisoners did just that and carried a report written by Witold Pilecki. Others got help from secret resistance groups, and some were able to escape. But most of the time, people who failed to do so were captured and put to death. The brothels of Auschwitz. Everyone knows that people in Nazi concentration camps who were healthy enough to work were forced to do so. But Heinrich Himmler's award plan, another part of the Nazis' forced labor scheme, wasn't made public until fairly recently. They said that Himmler was the one who decided that female inmates could be used as sex workers. They thought there were a few things going on here. Himmler thought that by providing women, he could stop people from being gay. Reuters also says that they felt that workers would work harder if they were promised a trip to the brothel at the end of the day. DW says that there were 10 brothels in the different camps, with Auschwitz having the biggest. There were 21 women working at the same time. Some were thought to have offered, while others were taken there and didn't know where they were until their first client walked in. Women who have talked about working in a Nazi brothel have talked about how they felt numb and ashamed, and how they had to see up to 10 men in 2 hours. Some people took advantage, and sometimes the guards would watch. The women had good memories of other times when the guards weren't around. They said some people just wanted to talk to someone nice. Liberation from Auschwitz wasn't the end for many. Before the 60th Army of the First Ukrainian Front arrived in Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum says that about 7,000 prisoners were already there. The sight was awful, but for thousands of people, they were still in hell. It was known that the Soviet army was coming, so the Nazis tried to destroy a lot of evidence and move about 56,000 prisoners deeper into German land so that they could still work for them. We know it happened, but the New York Times says there was so much chaos and misunderstanding that it's one of the times of the Holocaust that is least known and written about. We know that the people who had to walk out of Auschwitz before the troops came were chosen. Only those who were thought to be strong enough to live were taken. Even so, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum says that about 15,000 people died on the death marches from Auschwitz alone. There are memorials at the sites where groups were put to death. As they went through towns, some of them were shot. When the death march was over, the bodies were gathered and buried properly. A lot of other people have nothing. The debate on whether or not to bomb Auschwitz. In his first letters to the outside world, and in his passionate pleas after he escaped, Witold Pilecki wrote about what he had seen at Auschwitz. The Washington Post says that he wanted Auschwitz to be bombed from the start. He said that the people who lived there were stuck in hell, and that their pain and the Nazis' mass killings had to stop. But bombs were never dropped on Auschwitz. Why? It's not simple. The Guardian says Pilecki wasn't the only one who asked the US War Department to bomb Auschwitz and stop everything that was going on there. Members of the Jewish community also did the same. The US said no for a number of reasons, including the fact that they didn't have the precision bombing power, their bombers couldn't reach far enough, their air forces were needed elsewhere, and the mission put American troops in too much danger. The Jewish Virtual Library says there was another reason, the promise of innocent deaths. People kept asking, and in 1944, the answer was still no. What about the people who were in the camp, though? At the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, some survivors talked about hearing bombs close and how it gave them hope. We were no longer afraid of death. At any rate, not of that death. Every bomb that exploded filled us with joy. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.